Hey there, Dr. Louis here, and I've been seeing a lot of discussion on social media lately about the vegan diet, and specifically what I've been seeing discussed is the idea of, is the vegan diet harming Seventh-day Adventists? So that's what I want to get into today. That is our topic for today. We're going to take a look at the research to see what the effects of a plant-based diet are on Seventh-day Adventists. All right, so let's get into it. Hey there, Dr. Louis here, and if we haven't met yet, it's a pleasure to meet you. I am Dr. Louis. I'm a licensed naturopathic doctor. I'm also a board-certified psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, and I am passionate about combining the Three Angels messages with Christ's ministry of healing. So when I saw this topic being discussed on social media, I really wanted to kind of open up a space for us to continue that discussion, because I've seen, many different opinions about how the plant-based diet is negatively or positively impacting Seventh-day Adventists. And so I really wanted to take a moment, open up some space here in this video for us to look at the research and see what the research says the effects of a plant-based diet are on human physiology, okay? And specifically, how this diet is affecting Seventh-day Adventists. And then after we look at the research, I'm going to kind of share my perspective. And so I hope that you will stay until the end of this video so that we can kind of complete the discussion. All right. Okay, so the first thing that I want to look at is a randomized controlled trial. And in this trial, what they did, it has a pretty interesting study design. So what they did was they took a group of omnivores and then they divided them into three separate groups. Okay. So the first group was permitted to continue eating their normal omnivorous diet. So meat and plants, just a normal, your average diet, that's probably what the average American eats, okay? And then the second group was permitted to eat fish, but all other meat was restricted. So they ate, so I guess you could call it a pescatarian diet. So fish and then plants, okay? And then the third group of omnivores was told that they could only eat a plant-based diet. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the study. Let's go ahead and dive into the study right now, okay? So here it is. This is the study. It is called Restriction of Meat, Fish, and Poultry in Omnivores Improves Mood, a pilot randomized controlled trial. And as I mentioned, the study design involved taking a group of omnivores and dividing them into three separate groups. And the study duration was 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, these omnivores were permitted to continue eating an omnivorous diet if you were in the first group. In the second group, they were permitted to eat fish and plants. And then in the third group, they were only permitted to eat a plant-based diet. And what they found at the end of this study was that mood scores were unchanged for the omnivore group, so the group that ate the omnivorous diet, and the fish group, but several mood scores for the vegetarian participants actually improved significantly after the 2 weeks of this study. All right, so essentially what happened, what the study results are telling us is that when you take a group of omnivores, so specifically when they took a group of omnivores and switched them over to a plant-based diet, in as little as 2 weeks, these individuals began experiencing improvements in mental health. Now, why might that be? This is likely because of the effect of arachidonic acid. Now, without getting too much into the details here, essentially, arachidonic acid is an omega-6 fatty acid that we can make in our bodies. Essentially, when we eat a plant-based diet, we can produce arachidonic acid, but when we consume meat, when we consume animal products, we are consuming preformed arachidonic acid. And high levels of preformed arachidonic acid can have an inflammatory effect in the body, and this can lead to an increase in inflammation, essentially, but specifically negative mood, because high levels of inflammation have been linked to depression and other negative mood states. So that's essentially what is happening here in this study. All right, so now let's go ahead and look at our second study. So this study was entitled Long-Term Effects of a Very Low Carbohydrate Diet and a Low-Fat Diet on Mood and Cognitive Function, okay? And essentially in this study, what they did was they took a group of individuals who were overweight or obese, and they divided them into two groups. And they put one group on a plant-based diet and one group on a ketogenic diet, essentially. So a high fat, basically animal protein heavy diet, okay? So when they put the individuals on these diets, they then checked after 1 year to see what the effect was. And this is what the study says. It says by year 1, the overall mean weight loss was 13.7 kilograms with no significant difference between groups. So essentially, the individuals in the plant-based group they experienced the same amount of weight loss, or essentially the same amount of weight loss as the individuals who were put on a ketogenic diet. It's no secret that you will lose weight on a ketogenic diet. Like, this is for sure what happens, just like you lose weight on a plant-based diet, right? However, it says that over the course of the study, those who were on the low-fat plant-based diet experienced improvements in various domains of mental health. So we see here they use the Spielberger State Anxiety Inventory to test for anxiety levels and to track them. They use a Beck Depression Inventory to track depression levels. They also use the Profile of Mood State scores in order to check total mood disturbance, anger, hostility, confusion, bewilderment, and depression, dejection levels or profiles among participants. And with all of those scales that they utilize, those who were on the low-fat plant-based diet experienced significant benefit when compared to those who were on the low-carb, high-fat diet, okay? All right, so now let's look at the third study that we have here. So this study looks specifically at Seventh-day Adventists, and the goal of the study was to evaluate for the potential effect of the vegetarian diet on mood. So this is very similar to the previous two studies, albeit it does have a different study design. So this one is a cross-sectional study, and let's go ahead and look at it. So here we are looking at the study, and the study is entitled Vegetarian Diets Are Associated with Healthy Mood States, a cross-sectional study in Seventh-day Adventist adults. And what this study found was that the vegetarians actually reported significantly less negative emotion than the omnivores. And they also found that the vegetarian group reported significantly lower mean intakes of EPA and DHA. So these are the omega-3 fatty acids that we find in fish oils, as well as the omega-6 fatty acid, arachidonic acid. So this is that pro-inflammatory omega-6 fatty acid that I was talking about previously, as being contained within meat and other animal products, okay? So those on a plant-based diet, the vegetarians essentially had lower levels of EPA, DHA, and arachidonic acid. But they also reported higher mean intakes of shorter chain alpha-linolenic acid. So this is our plant-based source of omega-3. So this is like ALA that you would find in flax seeds and other plant-based like sources of omega-3s. And then also linoleic acid. And then it says that the results that they found here indicates that participants with low intakes of EPA, DHA, and arachidonic acid and high intakes of ALA and LA had better mood. So essentially what we're seeing here is that this study is finding that although people on a plant-based diet do have lower levels of EPA and DHA, they are experiencing improved mood compared to individuals eating an omnivorous diet. So, and as we saw in the first study that we looked at, individuals consuming EPA and DHA rich foods like fish, right? And essentially the reason for this is because what is more important than the absolute amount of omega-3 fatty acids that you're consuming is actually the ratio of omega-6 fatty acids to omega-3 fatty acids. Okay, so because people eating a plant-based diet have way less or lower levels of arachidonic acid, so this of course is found in our meat products, because they consume way less preformed arachidonic acid, they don't need, or it appears as though they don't need as much EPA and DHA and our other omega-3 fatty acids in order to balance out all of the pro-inflammatory preformed arachidonic acid, okay? So that is essentially what this study demonstrated. So we've been talking a lot about mood, and rightly so. As I mentioned before, I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, so this is something that I'm very much interested in. But let's see what the effects of a plant-based diet may be on physical health. So let's go ahead and take a look at this study. It is entitled Vegetarian Diets in the Adventist Health Study 2, a review of initial published findings, okay? And here we read that this study found that vegetarian dietary patterns were associated with a lower body mass index, a lower prevalence and incidence of diabetes mellitus, lower prevalence of the metabolic syndrome and its component factors. So we're talking about like hypertriglyceridemia, we're talking about low HDL, we're talking about dyslipidemia, essentially high cholesterol, we're talking about increased waist circumference, we're talking about insulin resistance and diabetes, things like that, okay? And then it also says it was associated with lower prevalence of hypertension and lower all-cause mortality, and in some instances, lower risk of cancer. All right, so before we move on, I want to take a moment to just touch briefly on this concept of all-cause mortality, because I want to make sure that we're on the same page. So this study found that vegetarian diets were associated with lower all-cause mortality. And essentially what that means is that they were less likely to die from any cause during the time of the study, right? So essentially, if a specific intervention is associated with lower all-cause mortality, you can sort of think of that as that group had increased longevity. You can think of it that way. They were less likely to die from any cause during the study. All right, so now let's move on to our next study. All right, so this study is entitled A Multi-Center Randomized Controlled Trial of a Nutrition Intervention Program in a Multi-Ethnic Adult Population in the Corporate Setting Reduces Depression and Anxiety and Improves Quality of Life, okay? The GEICO study. So this study was conducted over a total of 18 weeks, and what the researchers did was they divided the participants into two separate groups. One group received weekly instruction on following a completely plant-based diet. So they gave them instruction on how to adhere to this type of diet, what types of things they should eat, what they should not eat, things like, how to eat out on a plant-based diet, things like that. And the other group received no specific instruction. So they divided them into these two groups. And again, as I mentioned, this study was conducted on individuals who worked for GEICO. And let's go ahead and take a look at the results. So what were the results of this study after the 18 weeks, which is the length of the intervention? All right, so it says that at the end of the study, the individuals who received the instruction on consuming a plant-based diet ended up experiencing significant improvements in impairment because of health, overall work impairment because of health, non-work related activity impairment because of health, depression, anxiety, fatigue, emotional well-being, daily functioning because of physical health, and general health. So up until this point, we've primarily been looking at the effects of a vegetarian or vegan diet on mental health. But here we're looking at a study that also looks at physical health specifically and health in general. Okay, and here we see that the individuals who began eating a plant-based diet experienced improvement not only in depression and anxiety, but also in physical health and in health in general. They also were much more productive at work, and they were able to be more productive outside of work as well after following this plant-based diet for the duration of this study, okay? All right, so now let's go ahead and look at the next study, which is somewhat similar to this study in design, but it actually continued for a little bit of a longer period of time. So let's go ahead and look at that study. All right, so this one is called A Worksite Vegan Nutrition Program is Well Accepted and Improves Health-Related Quality of Life and Work Productivity. And this study lasted a total of 22 weeks. So this study here essentially involved participants whose BMI was 25 or above. So they were overweight at minimum. So at least in the overweight range. Or they had a previous diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. And that was the inclusion criteria for being included in this randomized controlled trial. So you had to either have type 2 diabetes or be overweight. Okay, and essentially what they did was they divided them again into two separate groups. And the first group was given weekly instruction on consuming a low-fat vegan diet. And then the second group received no dietary instruction. And again, this was for a total of 22 weeks. And so what we see here is that the researchers found that the vegan group reported improvements in general health. They reported improvements in physical functioning, in mental health, and vitality, and overall diet satisfaction compared with the control group. Okay, and the group that ate the completely plant-based diet also reported a decrease in food costs and increased difficulty finding foods when eating out, right? Which is expected. If you eat a plant-based diet, then you know that it can be sort of difficult to find foods when you're eating out. And of course, that was compared to the controlled group. And then the vegan group also reported a 40 to 46% decrease in health-related productivity impairments at work and in regular daily activities. So essentially what we're finding here is that in this study, the individuals who received the instruction regarding how to adhere to a completely plant-based diet, not only did they experience improvements in physical health, in mental health, and increased productivity at work, but they also experienced improved productivity outside of work, okay? And this is, of course, compared to the individuals who received no dietary instruction, okay? All right, so now let's go ahead and look at another Adventist health-related study. So this study was interesting because it looked at a very large group of Seventh-day Adventists, and it divided them into 5 separate groups based on the diet that they consumed. So let's go ahead and take a look at that study. All right, so the study is entitled Vegetarian Dietary Patterns and Mortality in Adventist Health Study 2. Okay, as I mentioned, this was a fairly large study, so they initially recruited a total of 96,469 Seventh-day Adventist men and women. And after they applied their exclusion criteria, they were left with 73,308 participants. Okay, and so they divided these participants into 5 different dietary patterns. So based on the type of diet they ate, they divided them into 5 groups. And this was the non-vegetarian group, the semi-vegetarian group, the pesco-vegetarian group, the lacto-ovo-vegetarian group, and the vegan group. Okay, and so out of this roughly 73,000 people, they followed them for 6 years. And at the end of the 6 years, a total of 2,570 people had died. Okay. So that's approximately 6 deaths per 1,000 people each year, okay? So when the researchers compared the people who ate the vegetarian diets to those who ate meat, what they found was that those who ate the vegetarian diet had about a 12% lower risk of dying from any cause. So this is again that all-cause mortality that we were talking about earlier. And then they further broke it down by the type of diet that the people ate, right? And so what they found was the vegans had a 15% lower risk of dying from any cause. The lacto-ovo-vegetarians had about a 9% lower risk. The pesco-vegetarians had about a 19% lower risk. The semi-vegetarians, those who ate meat occasionally, so once in a while, had about an 8% lower risk, okay? And based on that, what they concluded was that the vegetarian diet seemed to be linked to a lower risk of death from heart disease, kidney disease, and endocrine problems. So these are hormone-related problems. And then also some other non-cancer related causes as well. All right, and then what the researchers concluded at the end of this study was that the vegetarian diet was associated with a lower all-cause mortality, and then also some reductions in cause-specific mortality. So those are specifically those causes that I just mentioned, the cardiovascular causes, the renal or kidney-related causes, and then also the endocrine-related causes. So individuals who ate a vegetarian diet were less likely to die from those 3 types of causes. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a look at our next study. So this study is entitled A Mediterranean Diet and Low-Fat Vegan Diet to Improve Body Weight and Cardiometabolic Risk Factors, a randomized crossover trial. All right, so I thought it was important to include this study because some of the research that we look at can be somewhat conflicting, right? So we have looked at several studies that have compared this kind of pescatarian diet with a plant-based diet, and we have repeatedly seen that the individuals on the plant-based diet had improved mood, right? But then we just looked at the Adventist Health Study, which suggested that the reduction in all-cause mortality was higher when it came to a pescatarian diet compared to a completely plant-based diet, right? And so I really think that it's important to, just like we study the Bible, line upon line, precept upon precept, is very important for us to look at several different studies to ensure that we're getting a well-rounded view, like a really solid understanding of what is actually taking place and what the associations actually are, right? And so because of that, I thought it was important to look at this study, which is a randomized controlled trial that specifically compares a pescatarian diet or a Mediterranean diet, which is essentially more or less like heavily pescatarian. And then also it highlights like whole foods and things like that. So it's what most people would consider to be a healthy diet, but it also contains fish. And we're comparing that with a plant-based diet in this study, okay? So let's go ahead and see what the study results were. All right, so as I mentioned, this is a randomized trial, specifically a randomized crossover trial. And what the researchers did here was they took 62 overweight adults and they randomly assigned them to either the Mediterranean diet or a vegan diet, right? And this was for a total of 16 weeks. Okay, so before the study, they documented their body weight, their plasma lipids, so this is like their cholesterol, their blood pressure, and their body composition. So specifically your fat composition, right? And then they also measured insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity, okay? And then after they did all that and got all of those baseline levels, what they did was they allowed the participants to return to their baseline, so their typical diet, for a total of 4 weeks. And then after those 4 weeks, they started them for another 16 weeks on the opposite diet. Okay, so essentially what you have here is you're going to have individuals eating a Mediterranean diet for 16 weeks, then 4 weeks going back to their regular diet, and then 16 weeks on a completely plant-based or vegan diet. And then you'll have the same as well, but flipped, right? So you'll have 16 weeks on a vegan diet, 4 weeks on a regular, whatever it is that they eat on a normal basis, and then 16 weeks on a Mediterranean diet, okay? And so what they found when they completed this study was that the individuals on the Mediterranean diet did not lose a significant amount of weight, but when they were on a plant-based diet, so a vegan diet, the average amount of weight loss was 6 kilograms, okay? They also found that in the vegan group, so that in the completely plant-based group, there was a reduction in insulin resistance and an improvement in insulin sensitivity, okay? And there was no significant change on the Mediterranean diet, okay? And then also they looked at the individuals who had no medication changes during the study. And what they found was when they were on the vegan diet, they saw reductions in their total cholesterol and also in their LDL cholesterol, okay? Whereas there was no significant change in the individuals when they were on a Mediterranean diet, okay? What they did find was that blood pressure decreased on both diets, but it decreased a little bit more on the Mediterranean diet than on the vegan diet. And so the conclusion of the study was that a low-fat vegan diet improved body weight, lipid concentrations, and insulin sensitivity, both from baseline and compared with a Mediterranean diet. And then blood pressure decreased on both diets, but more on the Mediterranean diet, okay? So that is essentially what this study found. All right, and now as we wind down, as we prepare for me to share my final thoughts and then for us to close out this video, I want to go ahead and share one last study with you. This study is pretty important, so let's go ahead and take a look. This study is entitled Dietary Carbohydrate Intake and Mortality, a Prospective Cohort Study and Meta-Analysis. And let's go ahead and read the study findings. So this study said, in the meta-analysis of all cohorts, which was 432,179 participants, both low carbohydrate consumption, so less than 40% of your calories being from carbs, and high carbohydrate consumption, so more than 70%, conferred greater mortality risk than did moderate intake, which was consistent with a U-shaped association, okay? And then it says, however, results varied by the source of macronutrients. Mortality increased when carbohydrates were exchanged for animal-derived fat or protein, and mortality decreased when the substitutions were plant-based. So at the end of this study, this is what the researchers said. I'm going to read directly from the study. And it says, animal-derived protein and fat sources from sources such as lamb, beef, pork, and chicken were associated with higher mortality, whereas those that favored plant-derived protein and fat intake from sources such as vegetables, nuts, peanut butter, and whole grain breads were associated with lower mortality. Now, these results suggest that the source of our food, so where we get our proteins and fats, may modify the association between carbohydrate intake and mortality. So to put that a little bit more simply, the results of this study suggest that even if we eat a diet that's higher or lower in carbohydrates than the suggested moderate intake, you may be able to increase your likelihood of longevity by replacing animal-based sources of proteins and fats with plant-based sources. All right, so now that we have looked at a lot of research, I believe that I've been able to share enough research to where the person who is truly seeking and truly seeking to know God's will can see that the evidence does support a plant-based diet. The evidence is in favor of consuming plants, the original diet that God gave to us in the Garden of Eden, with the modification that he made after sin entered the earth, right? So of course, including vegetables, right? But the fact of the matter is that this discussion that I've been seeing online is about more than just research. It's about more than just diet, right? It's much bigger than that. This is really a question of, will we have the faith to take God at his word and to believe him even when our senses seem to be telling us otherwise, right? And the fact of the matter is that God told us so many years ago, like well before any of this research that I've shared today was even conducted, that the diet that we should consume for longevity and for optimal physical and mental health is a plant-based diet. And so the question comes down to, will we believe God? Will we believe his prophets? Or will we go with our feelings? Will we go with the latest guru or, the latest scientists or researchers who do not acknowledge God or his word, right? The story is told of John Harvey Kellogg. Now you'll remember that this is a prominent figure in Seventh-day Adventist history. He was a medical doctor and he was the medical director of the Battle Creek Sanitarium. So the story is told that an individual came up to him and asked him, hey, Dr. Kellogg, how is it that when these various like fad diets or other fad treatments show up, you never get taken by them, right? So something will come on the scene and take the world by storm. Everybody will begin to do this new thing. It'll be, like the most popular thing to do. And then after some time passes, we'll realize that the thing that we once thought was such a blessing actually led to a lot of pain and a lot of hurt and damage, right? And this person was noting that John Harvey Kellogg never got caught up in these things. So they asked him why. And he said that when a new therapy or a new treatment comes on the scene, he holds it up next to the Bible and inspiration. And he sees, hey, is this something that is in harmony with what God has already revealed? And if it is, then he adopts it and he begins to teach others to do the same. And if it is not, then he discards it. And if you read the Spirit of Prophecy, you'll see that before his apostasy, so before he gave up belief in, the Bible and the message, John Harvey Kellogg was actually called God's physician, and this is, Jesus says, when the Son of Man cometh, will he find faith on the earth? And really, to be honest with you, that is the question that's being asked today. Will Jesus find faith on the earth? He has given us ample evidence to believe if we want to believe him, right? But at the end of the day, there are going to be some of us who just want to believe our own thing. We just want justification for, whatever it is that we want to do. And so we hear anyone saying like, hey, we don't have to do this, or this is actually harming us. And we're like, hallelujah, let's go. I don't want to do that anyway, right? I've been there. So I don't mean to, make this sound like a flippant thing. I understand that, that mindset, but at the end of the day, I want to reiterate that this is much more serious than that. This is really a question of, will we believe God? Faith is believing God above science, falsely so called, because we know that all true science comes from God. Faith is believing God above our senses. So will we believe what he has revealed? Will we look at the studies and see that there are associations that the plant-based diet, the diet that he has given us, when appropriately and intelligently implemented, right? Because there are ways that we can implement this type of diet that it can be very much detrimental. As a matter of fact, if you want to talk a little bit more about how to implement a completely plant-based diet healthfully, and what type of supplementation may be necessary, things like that, then go ahead and leave a comment below and let me know. And then if enough people are interested in that topic, then I can record a video just talking about the type of diet that I recommend for my patients But in order to not veer too far away from the topic for today, I'll just leave that at that, right? So the fact is that there are ways to implement this diet that it can have negative effects on physical and mental health. But when intelligently applied, God's instructions only bring about health. Because at the end of the day, God is wise. He's all-knowing. And He created our bodies, and He knows exactly what they need in order to function optimally. The changes in the quality of the soil, the increase in, pesticides, herbicides that are being used, none of this caught God by surprise. And yet He still chose to tell us that this is the type of diet that we should be eating. We should not allow ourselves to think that we are wiser than God, right? We shouldn't allow ourselves to think that we are wiser than God, then we understand better how to take care of our bodies. Because right now, and specifically at this time of Earth's history, what the Lord is looking for is individuals who will take Him at His word, who will believe His promises, believe His instructions, and adhere to them. And if you are a healthcare professional, then He can use you even more mightily, because what He wants to do right now is to combine the message of health and healing according to Christ's method with the last day message of salvation, the three angels' messages. And so I just wanted to kind of address this topic. As I mentioned before, I've seen a lot of people talking about it lately on social media. I've seen a lot of different opinions being shared, and I wanted to kind of urge you guys to be careful and just kind of to reconsider what role this discussion may be playing in the final events, right? We are at a time in Earth's history where we are to, more than ever before, we are to guard our faith in God. God is looking for people who will take Him at His word, people who He can use, people who do not think that they are wiser than He is, right? People who will trust Him even when their senses are telling them otherwise, right? And this is the place that we have to get to, and God is in the business of bringing us to this place. And so what we have to do is to cooperate with Him, right? Because this is His work. This is not our work, but we are to make sure that we're not getting in the way of Him doing His work, right? And then if you're a healthcare professional, I want to appeal to you specifically, because we are at a time in Earth's history where God is seeking to do a united work, and He is looking for people who will collaborate with Him and cooperate with Him in doing a preparatory work in this earth. Specifically, He wants to combine the proclamation of the three angels' messages with His method of healing, right? This is what Christ has wanted to do for many, many years, and He still wants to do this today. But in order to do that, He needs people who He can use, people who have a solid understanding of anatomy and physiology, things of that nature, but who also, most importantly, have an unshakable faith in Him as the creator of the body and the restorer of the soul. This is what Christ is looking for. And the fact of the matter is, if we as healthcare professionals do not step up to the plate and make ourselves available to God, He will use whoever He can. And He is using whoever He can. Christ is using whoever He can right now. And so today, what I want to do is I want to extend an invitation to you, because Christ is looking for more workers. He's looking for more people who will take Him at His word, who will believe what He says because He says it, and not because they see it, not because this scientist says it, but because Christ said it, and who will surrender more fully to Him and allow Him to accomplish His will through them, right? Because Christ right now is seeking to do a united work. He is seeking to unite the proclamation of the three angels' messages with His true method of healing, and we do not have time for distractions. We have to take God at His word and allow Him to accomplish His will in our lives first, and also for the salvation of everyone with whom we come into contact. And so this is my invitation to you. I pray that the Holy Spirit is speaking to your heart even now, that I pray that the studies that we looked at were helpful. And yet at the end of the day, it's really not about the studies, is it? It's really more so about believing God, because time has shown that even when he told us the type of diet that we were to consume, when no one else was doing this and we were doing it, we were seeing the beneficial results. And so the fact of the matter is that if we had followed Christ's direction from the beginning, the world would be coming to us now asking us, hey, how can we have the longevity that you're having? And yet we still see glimpses of this, right? We still see glimpses of this with the blue zones and things like that. And yet Christ wants to do even more. He wants to do more. He wants to do more through us. And so as I close out this video, I just invite you to consider the things that we've talked about and to exercise faith in Christ. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.